Hello everyone. I'm Suraj, as this is the day 5 of my training session, and I've got a couple of questions in the form of assignment. So let's just quickly dive into it. So the first question here is, what is the difference between Angular and AngularJS? Angular and AngularJS both were developed by Google, and these are basically a web development framework. Looks somewhat similar, but these are totally different. Like for AngularJS, the language used was JavaScript, whereas in Angular, we have been using a TypeScript, which is developed by Microsoft. So yes, moving forward, Angular, the AngularJS is used for single page application, and the Angular is used for a large application or complex application, we can say. As the Angular is updated version of AngularJS, as AngularJS was developed on 2010, whereas it was updated to Angular in the year of 2016. So to learn about Angular, we need not be having a knowledge of AngularJS, as it is the updated version, but we can say like we must be knowing somewhat about AngularJS, but it is not so. It is entirely different, as it is developed with TypeScript, a different language, you can say. Coming to the architecture, here we will be using a model view controller, where we can see like business logic is written in model, and the output which we'll be getting is in the placed in the controller part. So for this Angular or this AngularJS, we can say like these have two parts, which is called as components and the directives. Yes. So and the most important difference we can say is AngularJS was not supporting mobile browsers as Chrome, Safari, or anything, whereas Angular, it will be supporting mobile browsers. Here, and moving on to the Angular, for binding the data, these won't be requiring some special directive or directory. Here we'll be using this a common braces for the element, or I mean the event binding, and for the square braces, it will be linked to the property binding. So moving on to the structure, we can say Angular is somewhat simple compared to AngularJS. So it was updated to Angular, or they moved on to the Angular, and AngularJS is not yet depleted, but yeah, we can say like moving forward, it might be replicating. So yes, the we can say like an Angular, it is easy for like debugging or storing of the coding files, or integrating the or involving the third party libraries. So yes, combining, or if we are speaking about the combining speed, um, the speed is more in the Angular compared to the AngularJS. We can say like AngularJS is 5 times slower to Angular, as the algorithm for the binding is somewhat different, and it is improved in the Angular. So yes, moving on to the second question, what is the difference between Angular and the React.js? Yes, here we can say like Angular is somewhat a full-fledged framework written in JavaScript, whereas the React.js, it's a small part, or we can say it is a JavaScript libraries. So yes, we can compare like the Angular is somewhat a giant monster, and the React.js is somewhat a simpler part of it, a simpler library of it. So yes, moving on forward, these uses means the Angular uses HTML as the template, and the syntax will be used on the form of HTML for the building of the components. So moving on forward, a single tool is required for the debugging, or we can say for testing, whereas a couple of tools are required for React.js to test or debug it. So here in Angular, we can say it is somewhat a two-way data binding, whereas in React.js, it is somewhat a single-way binding, which means that if there is any changes made in the model state, the automatically the changes will be implemented on the model also. But in single way, it is not as so. So yes, we can say like these Angular is mostly used for large scale application or somewhat complex application. But the React.js is somewhat simpler and it can be used for the single line application or simpler application. But yes, comparing to the Angular and React.js, for the beginners, I can say like for Angular, it is very tough, or I can't say it as a tough, but yes, somewhat complex to learn rather than the React.js, because React.js is not having much to learn. Like you can say, it is just a simpler JavaScript library, but the Angular is somewhat a full-fledged framework which is developed should be developed on JavaScript. So yes, coming on to the performance side, high performance in the Angular, and compared to React.js, this is somewhat low, but yes, it is very easy to use. And yeah, we can use it for the large application, no doubt, but there is some other priorities to be given for this session. So yes, and moving on further, we can say like the React.js is easy, and comparing to the Google statistics, we can say like for React.js, there are many downloads, and the priority given in the Google is somewhat high compared to the Angular, as it is easy, as it is just a simpler JavaScript library. So yes, this is it. So moving on to the third question. List out at least 5 mobile application framework. So here we need to understand what is framework. Like we can say like framework is something which is a structure, a specific structure, or we can say it is somewhat a guidelines or rules which to be followed to prepare or to develop application. Okay, here we can see like here we'll try to understand how many different types of frameworks are available for the mobile application. We can say for the application, not specifically for mobile application. Just we'll try to understand in the brief. So yes, we can say like there is something called as native application, which is specifically for iOS or Android. It is, we can say like it is somewhat platform specific. Coming on forward, there is something called as web application, which will be running on the web browsers. And there is something called as hybrid application here, which means it is a combination of the native and the web application, which can be run on any platform. So yes, let's speak about the 5 different types of frameworks, which is used by the for which is used for the mobile application development. So yes, one we can say like it is a native script, which is an open source framework, no doubt. It is useful for hybrid application and similar for the native application also. So moving on forward, there is something called as Ionic, which is also an open source application, which is used for developing a native, hybrid, or any online application. There is, we can say, these applications which are developed on Ionic, which is an open source for native and hybrid applications. We can say apps can be installed in all devices. It is not like it is being specific for Android or specific for the iOS. So yes, moving on forward, there is something called as jQuery mobile. Then another one is the Flutter. We can say Flutter, which is, I guess it is developed by Google. Okay, so moving on to the fourth question. How do we decide what backend technology we should use in our project? So yes, firstly we'll try to understand about the architecture here, which means that to develop an application or to develop a full-fledged application, here we can see something known as a front end, which is a UI, which whenever a person types in a website on Google or any browser, the user interface which we can see is the front end part of it. Then something called as a backend technology, where we can see the codes are written or the database are stored, where we can say like database, which is the storing and retrieving of data, which will be interacted to the browser or to the front end through the through a API. Let's just speak about it on the next question. But yeah, here we'll try to understand for the backend technology what we'll be considering to decide like which backend technology we should be implementing to our project. So yes, firstly we'll be deciding a size and the complexity of the application, like the size, how big the application should be, and the complexity will be seeing like how much complex the application is, and is it developed, is it easy to be developed by this technology or some different technology. Here we can keep in mind like the type of product we are preparing, like if it is a database interactive, or we can say like if we are preparing an application, or if we are cooking an application of the booking system, or we can say like for social networking sites. So we should be deciding on this basis too. And yes, the most, we can say the most important part is the cost. Like for some backend technologies are open source, free of cost, whereas whereas we can say other technologies are somewhat costly, or they are they are paid versions. So yes, then further we can move on to the security. We can say like for the which backend will be getting a higher priority, higher security end, and we can say like for reliability issues, or we can say the scalability. We can also consider the scalability here, like increasing the size. Maybe it might be horizontal or vertically increasing the size. And yes, we can lastly we can discuss like flexibility, in which backend technology will be getting a flexible um, thing, a flexible end where we can develop a software. So yes, moving on to the fifth question, how do we decide what kind of database we should use in our project? As I spoke a very little in the previous question about the database, let me be somewhat brief. The database here, we can say like it is a storage of data which will be coming from the front end, or which will be given from the back end to the front end, so that it will be visible on the user interface. So yes, here we can store the data, we can retrieve the data. So here we can say like there is a need to decide like what kind of database we will be needing. So yes, to decide this, the firstly and the main part is, I guess, the purchase cost. Then we can say like the storage or the storage size. Then we can say the network requirements, like uh, these many requirements, or these network is suitable for the data retrieval or the data communication, so that it gets the request and it proceeds further to send the output to the user interface. And somewhat the operation also we can consider, or maybe the maintenance, which is, we can say like the security part, like if it supports the back end, or we can say like if it supports to the troubleshooting part, like if we get some defect, or if the database gets crashed. So we need some security in the backend, so that we can store the backup, or so that we can restore the data, we can say. And mostly the scalability, which is basically the horizontal and the vertical, which means vertical means extending the size of the particular database, whereas in the horizontal, we can say like new database or new memories will be added. So yes, if you are speaking about security, we must speak about SQL injection. SQL injection, as the name suggests, injection means it is something inserted to some field. So this SQL injection, we can say like this is something which is fed into the user or the password field, wherein when this command or this function or this SQL query runs, it will give a user the true output, or like we can say for example, 1 equals to 1. So this statement always will be right. So the user or the password will uh, be ready to access, and here the third party or the ethical hackers will be hacking the database, and they may vary some price or some data, and it will be somewhat a loss. It will be somewhat a loss type of thing for the businesses or the B2B transactions. So yes, we can also consider like if this database is stable, or we can say like the database is not getting crashed, we can say it should be stable 24 into 7 into 365 days. And lastly, the performance issues must be reduced, or lastly, the performance which should be high when we are considering the database. So yes, thank you so much for your time.